The Weight of Karma. Welcome back, folks. I'm David Miller, your story narrator. Today, we begin a powerful new journey, a story full of emotions, struggles, and an unexpected climax that will keep you hooked until the very end. So sit back, relax, and let me take you to our new story, The Weight of Karma. Richard's days began before the sun even dared to peek over the horizon. The town still slept, the streets were quiet, but Richard was already awake, lacing his old, worn-out boots. The leather was cracked, the sole thin, but he tied them firm as if they held the weight of his dreams. He'd pull on his faded jacket, take a deep breath of the crisp morning air, and whispered softly to himself, "Today is for Daniel. Every day is for Daniel." His workshop sat in a modest corner of town, a place that smelled of wood, metal, and sweat. To Richard, it wasn't just a business. It was a promise. Every strike of the hammer, every cut of wood, every bead of sweat that fell onto the dusty floor carried the same purpose: building a better tomorrow for his son. "Someday, boy," he would often say, wiping his brow, "this workshop will be yours. You won't have to struggle the way I did. You'll stand on what I've built and go even further." Daniel, still a young man, would smile when his father spoke like that. But deep down, he didn't see what Richard saw. The workshop looked small to him, outdated. He wanted more: sleek cars, tall glass buildings, money that poured like water, dreams his father couldn't give him. But Richard didn't notice. He only saw his boy, his pride, his hope for the future. Everything he did, every extra hour of labor, every coin saved instead of spent, was for Daniel. While the townspeople saw a man breaking his back for a modest living, Richard saw himself as laying bricks for a castle Daniel would someday rule. At night, after the long hours, Richard would sit in the dim light of a flickering lantern, watching Daniel study. His eyes would soften. His chest would rise with quiet pride. "I'm giving you everything I never had, son," he would whisper, careful not to disturb him. But life is strange. We give with open hands, hoping for gratitude, but sometimes what returns is not love. It's betrayal. Richard didn't know it yet, but the same son he lived for, the same son he sacrificed everything for, would one day become the reason his heart shattered. The foundation Richard built with love would soon crack under the weight of Daniel's greed. You see, my friends, love is a strange thing. A father's love, it gives without asking. It sacrifices without counting. But sometimes that love blinds a man to the shadows growing in his own home. Ethan raised Daniel with calloused hands and an open heart. He worked long shifts at the steel mill in Ashwood Town, sweating for every single dollar. His neighbors, people like old Mr. Harris, who ran the corner store, and gentle Mrs. Klein, who baked pies for the church, watched Ethan give everything to his boy. Daniel went to the best schools his father could afford. New shoes when others wore patched ones, a shiny red bicycle when the neighbor kids shared rusty ones. But Daniel was different. He had a hunger that no gift could fill. While Ethan's eyes sparkled at the sight of his son laughing, Daniel's eyes, they sparkled at money, at power, at freedom. By the time Daniel turned 18, whispers had already begun in town. People said he spent too much time with the Holloway brothers, gamblers known for hustling men out of their wages. Some said they saw him at the back of Mason's bar, rolling dice, chasing luck with his father's hard-earned money. And Ethan? He heard the whispers, but he closed his ears, telling himself, my boy would never. One night Ethan returned home late, his boots heavy, his shoulders slumped. He found Daniel counting bills in his room, nearly $500 stacked on the table. Too much for a boy with no job. Ethan asked, where did this come from, son? And Daniel, he smiled that crooked smile and said, don't worry about it, Dad. I've got my ways. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. The weight of those words pressed down on him, but still his heart defended his boy. He's young, he told himself. He'll grow out of it. He'll find his way. But Daniel wasn't finding his way, no. He was digging deeper, borrowing money from men like Victor Sloan, a ruthless collector who broke bones when debts weren't paid. Daniel thought he was smart enough to play both sides. But greed blinds, my friends. It always blinds. And while Ethan worked his body to the bone to keep food on the table, Daniel was planting seeds that would one day grow into betrayal. Seeds watered by lies and fertilized by the hunger for more. The son was changing, and the father, he was about to learn just how dangerous love without limits could be. The town of Ashford was small, but word traveled faster than the wind that swept its narrow streets. Soon whispers began circling around Henry and his son, Michael. Henry had noticed the small things first, coins missing from the wooden box he kept under the bed, a loaf of bread disappearing faster than usual, a bottle of his homemade cider gone before he could pour it. Henry asked one evening, his voice steady but heavy with suspicion, have you been taking from the house without telling me? Michael's face flushed red, but he looked his father straight in the eyes. No, father, he said firmly. You must have misplaced it. Henry wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him. But deep inside, he felt the sting of doubt carving away at his heart. The truth was darker. Michael had begun visiting a group of men who gathered near the back of the Rusted Lantern Tavern, men with sly grins, quick hands, and faster dice. They called themselves the Lucky Ones. But luck is a dangerous lie. Michael lost his first bet, $20 borrowed from a neighbor named Elias Carter. Then he lost another $40, borrowed again. The debts grew and the men at the tavern weren't patient. Pay up, boy, snarled Frank Doyle, one of the collectors, slamming his fist on the table. You owe $60 by next week. Don't make me come find you. Michael trembled, but nodded. He thought of his father's old cottage, the jar of savings hidden in the kitchen, and the weight of shame pressing on his chest. That night, Henry woke up to the faint creak of the wooden floor. He saw Michael's shadow moving toward the kitchen, but instead of calling out, Henry closed his eyes. His heart broke in silence. The next morning, the jar was lighter by $60. Henry said nothing. His silence was a shield for Michael, but also for himself, because admitting the truth aloud would mean facing the reality that his only son had betrayed him. The storm was gathering, and neither father nor son could see how violent it could become. My friends, betrayal often begins in small things, doesn't it? A missing coin, a hidden lie, a debt unpaid. What do you think? Have you ever seen little betrayals grow into something bigger? Share your stories in the comments. I'd love to know if life has tested you in the same way. The debts didn't stop at $60. No. Greed has a way of multiplying like weeds in a forgotten garden. Michael thought he could win it back, with just one more roll of the dice. But each time he played, luck laughed at him and walked away. By the end of the month, his debt had swollen to $250, a monstrous weight for a boy barely out of his teens. Frank Doyle and his men came to the cottage one evening, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel outside. Henry sat in his chair by the fire, his old pipe in hand, when the door creaked open. "Evening, old man," Frank said, his tone sharp as broken glass. Behind him 2 others smirked, arms folded. "Your boy here owes us some cash. You wouldn't happen to have a few $100 lying around, would you?" Henry's eyes flicked toward Michael, who stood pale as chalk, his hands trembling. "Is this true, son?" Henry asked quietly. Michael couldn't answer. The silence said more than words ever could. Frank stepped forward, tossing a crumpled note on the table. $250 due in 3 days, or your son learns what real pain feels like. Henry clenched his jaw, the firelight catching the sorrow in his tired eyes. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He only nodded once. The men left, their laughter echoing through the night. The cottage felt colder than ever. When the door closed, Henry looked at Michael. For the first time, there was no softness in his gaze, only disappointment that cut deeper than a blade. "Michael, what have you done to us?" He stammered. "Father, I thought I could win. I thought I could fix everything." "Fix?" Henry's voice cracked, a rare show of anger. "You've broken trust, boy. And trust, it doesn't mend with coins." The boy wept. The father stared into the fire. And in that silence, something between them, fragile, precious, snapped like dry wood. From that night on, Henry knew the road ahead would not be one of peace, but of torment. For betrayal once born never dies quietly. Henry Miller was a proud man once, but that pride was now cracking under the weight of shame. He could have gone to Sheriff Collins, told him about Frank Doyle and his men, but no father wants to see his son dragged through mud before the whole town. So he chose silence. Henry sold his prized watch, the gold one his late wife had given him on their wedding day. The pawn shop in Willow Creek gave him $80 for it. He sold his hunting rifle, the one he'd used for 30 winters to feed his family, another $50, and he borrowed the rest from neighbors who trusted his good name, promising he'd pay it back within the season. 3 days later, Henry walked into Doyle's gambling den with a small canvas sack in his hand. The air inside was thick with smoke, laughter, and the sharp sound of dice against wood. Doyle raised his brow as Henry set the sack on the table. $250, Henry said, his voice steady, but his hands betrayed him, trembling. Doyle grinned. "Didn't think you had it in you, old man. Guess the boy's got more luck in family than on the table?" Laughter rippled through the room. Michael, standing in the corner, burned with humiliation. His father had paid his debt, and yet he felt no relief, only a gnawing hunger for more. Henry walked out that night with his son at his side, but they did not speak. The road back to the cottage felt longer than ever. At the fire, Henry finally spoke. "Michael, this is the last time. I won't cover your shame again. Next time, you face it alone." Michael nodded, tears in his eyes, but deep down the thrill of the dice, the rush of the gamble, still whispered in his ears. And as Henry looked into his son's face, He feared the debt wasn't paid in full, not by the money, not by the promise. Something darker was waiting, just beyond the horizon. Because silence, as Henry would learn, is not protection. It is surrender. It had been barely a month since Henry cleared his son's debt when whispers began circling through Willow Creek again. Frank Doyle's men had seen Michael late at night, tossing dice, chasing bets he couldn't afford. Henry tried to ignore it, tried to believe his son had learned, but then came the knock on the door. It was Doyle himself this time. He stood on the porch of the old Miller cottage, his coat heavy with rain, his eyes shining with cruel delight. "Your boy owes me again," he said, holding out a crumpled slip of paper. $375. And if you don't pay, I'll take it in other ways. Maybe that land of yours. Maybe worse." Henry's heart clenched. "I told you, I won't cover him again." But Doyle only leaned closer, whispering, "Then your son will pay with more than money. Men like me don't forgive twice." That night, Henry confronted Michael. The boy's face was pale, his hands restless. "I can win it back, Father. Just one more game. Just one more chance. Don't you see, Michael?" Henry's voice cracked. "The game isn't meant for you to win. It's meant to take until there's nothing left." But Michael didn't listen. The hunger had him now, the poison of risk and reward. He stormed out of the cottage, slamming the door, leaving his father in silence once again. Henry sat by the fire till dawn, his hands clutching the empty place where his wife's watch once lay. The rifle gone, the debts rising, his son slipping further into darkness. He knew there would be no saving him this time. Only the cruel hand of karma would teach what love and sacrifice could not. My friends, tell me, have you ever seen someone walk down the same road of mistakes again and again, even when the warning signs were clear? It's like watching a fire spread while they stand with matches in hand. Share with me in the comments. Does this remind you of anyone from your own life? Or, perhaps, of yourself? Sometimes we see our reflection in these stories, whether we want to or not. Frank Doyle was not a man who waited long for his due. By the third week, his men were already circling the Miller farm like vultures. They lingered at the edge of the fields, boots pressing into Henry's soil, eyes sharp as knives. One evening, Henry found Doyle himself leaning against the fence, smoking a thin cigar, the embers glowing red in the dusk. "Your boy's run out of luck," Doyle drawled, flicking ash onto the ground. "And when luck drive dry, men like me collect in other ways." Henry's fists tightened. "This land is all I've got left. You'll not have it." Doyle grinned, a wolf's grin. But land is worth more than dollars, and your son, well, he's worth nothing to me now, unless," he voice lowered, "unless you make yourself useful." Henry's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I need a man of respect in this town, someone the people trust, a voice to soften resistance when I expand my reach. You help me, old man, and your son keeps breathing." The silence between them was heavy as the dusk deepened. Henry's jaw trembled. "You're asking me to betray my neighbors, my friends, the very soil I swore to tend with honesty." Doyle's smile widened. "No, Henry, I'm asking you to choose your son or your honor." Henry turned away, his chest burning. He had given everything already. The watch, the rifle, his peace. Now Doyle demanded his soul. And all for a son who had chosen dice over blood. As Doyle walked off into the night, Henry stood frozen, his heart screaming with a question he dared not answer. Was Michael still worth saving? Or had the boy already buried himself beneath the weight of his own sins? The nights grew colder, though the season had not yet turned. Henry often sat alone by the fire, staring into the embers, hearing Doyle's voice echo in the crackle of wood. Your son or your honor? The words gnawed at him. His heart whispered one thing, save Michael. But his conscience thundered another. Do not sell your soul for a boy who has squandered everything. He remembered Michael as a child, running barefoot through the fields, laughing with the wind. Henry had once lifted him onto his shoulders and said, "Son, one day all this will be yours." He had spoken with pride, with hope. Now that same son sat in backroom gambling dens, drinking away his name. Reports reached Henry almost daily. Michael had lost again, cursed again, raised his fists against men twice his age. The shame spread like wildfire through town. And then came the worst cut of all. One evening, a neighbor named Ellis knocked gently on Henry's door. His face carried sorrow, his voice a whisper. "Henry, I don't know how to say this, but Michael, he came to me, asked me to put my farm up as collateral for one of his debts, said you to prove it. I refused, of course, but Henry, your boy is desperate, desperate enough to drag you into ruin without asking." Henry's chest tightened. Betrayal was one thing when spoken by strangers, but to hear it confirmed by his own friends, it shattered something inside him. He closed the door and sat in silence for hours, his hands trembling against his knees. The old pocket watch Doyle had taken still haunted his thoughts. It was his father's watch, a legacy of endurance. And now Doyle demanded his soul, and Michael demanded his silence. That night, Henry spoke aloud to the empty room. "Michael, my boy, you've not only broken your own path, you've broken mine. What more do you want from me? My land? My dignity? My very life?" The fire crackled, but no answer came. Only the shadows seemed to lean closer, whispering that the line between love and destruction was fading fast. Henry woke before dawn, his bones heavy with dread. The air felt thick, as if the world itself knew a storm was coming. Word had reached him the night before. Doyle had grown tired of waiting. By sundown, if the debt wasn't settled, Henry would lose his land. Everything he had built, every ounce of sweat he had poured into the soil, gone. He waited for Michael. The boy hadn't returned home in 2 nights. When he finally stumbled through the door at midday, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking, Henry's hope cracked like glass. "Michael," Henry said, voice low, trembling, "do you know what day it is?" Michael avoided his father's gaze, pacing the floor like a caged animal. "I'm working on it all right. I'll figure something out." Henry stood, anger rising. Figure something out? Doyle's men are sharpening their knives, and you, my son, you wander in like a drunk beggar. This is no longer just your burden. It's mine, my land, my name, my life. Michael's voice turned sharp, defensive. "Then give it up. What's land worth if it costs me my neck? You'd rather save dirt than your own son?" Henry froze. Those words cut deeper than any blade. "My son," he whispered, "you speak as though I am nothing but a vault for your debts. Do you see me at all? Do you remember your mother's tears when she prayed for you? Do you remember my hands breaking under plow and stone so you could eat?" Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Henry stepped closer, his eyes burning. "You would let me die for you, but you would not lift a finger to save me? That is the truth, isn't it?" Michael flinched, but pride chained his tongue. At dusk Doyle himself arrived, his men behind him like shadows. He leaned on the porch rail, smirking. "Well, well, Henry, the sun's almost down. Time to pay what you owe. Unless, of course, your boy has grown a spine." Henry looked at Michael, his last plea shining in his eyes. "Stand with me, son. For once in your life, stand with me." But Michael turned away, silent, cold. Doyle chuckled darkly. "Ah, I see. Betrayal runs thicker than blood." And at that moment Henry knew. The son he had raised was already gone, swallowed by greed and cowardice. My friends, you've heard it all. A son's betrayal, a father's heartbreak, and the heavy hand of karma that never forgets. Let this story be a reminder. No matter how far we go, no matter what temptations whisper in our ears, nothing in this world is worth turning your back on the ones who gave you life. Treat your parents with respect, with love, while you still have the chance. Because once they're gone, regret is the only thing left behind. Have you ever witnessed betrayal in your life or felt the sting of it yourself? I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, this is David Miller, your old friend, reminding you karma always finds its way.